Maureen Lennon, writer. What was challenging about putting this story on stage?
I've actually never done an adaptation before, but if anyone's looking, I'm really ready to do one. Because I've loved doing this. And I think in many ways it has been like adapting a novel. Obviously this isn't fiction, but there is a source material. I suppose the great thing about that is coming up with story is hard. I'd say it's actually the thing that takes the longest as the writer, like coming up with what should happen. And, you know, when you're adapting something, that's kind of there for you. But the challenge within that is, one, the volume of it. I mean, Mary Wollstonecraft had a tragically short life. She dies at 38, but she does so much stuff, like a mad amount of stuff. And theatre can't just be one thing after the other. You know, that's boring. Like, that's a biography and that's not alive and it doesn't live as a story. So you've got to find your arc within that and you've got to find the beat. So you've got to pick out a strand. And being totally honest, you've got to know what you're trying to say with that story, because actually you could do 15 plays of Mary Wollstonecraft's life and they could be really, really different depending on what version of her you think serves the story that you are telling. And, you know, one of the biggest challenges we had was just, quite honestly, like, a lot of the stuff that happens to her is really sad. It can feel relentless. And I don't think that is a great night in the theatre, to just come in and be battered by the patriarchy again and again and again and the horrible things that happen to her. So it was about finding, like, within that struggle and within that tragedy, why are we bothering to tell it? Where is the hope in that? And where is the love and the belief? And what's the bigger picture than the events that we've just got of the biography?
What research did you undertake?
Yeah, so I'm kind of laughing because I'm a big researcher. I would say when you're a writer, research, some writers, definitely me, it can tip over into procrastination, because the more you're researching, you know, you can't possibly write it until you've read that book or whatever. And this, just being totally honest, this project's been a really long time cooking. So I think I first ever pitched it, it will have been nearly 9 years to get it to the stage. And it's been in different forms, and that wasn't the whole time, but yeah. So in terms of research, like I said, I already knew a little bit about Wollstonecraft because my mum's a really big fan. My mum's actually a philosopher, and she used to run a Mary Wollstonecraft lecture that looked into Mary as a philosopher. She's not always been taken the most seriously in that standpoint, but actually she was a really important philosopher, kind of around the you know, the big hitters. So I'd actually been to that lecture a few different times. I'd read her most famous work, A Vindication of the Rights of Women, at university, and, like, being totally honest, I found it quite hard. I think it can be hard to get into as a text, but it's the ideas of it that are so, like, thrilling and exciting, and looking at her from a standpoint of ideas, like, through her philosophy, is what, like, first made me really connect with her. So I read all of her works after that. I went away and read them all. I read, there's loads of letters. You can get collected letters. They were the thing that helped me move towards being able to see it as a play the most, because in the letters you get a real sense of her personality and her voice, even though, you know, letter writing at the time was very constructed. So that's not how someone would have actually spoken the way that they're writing, but you do get a sense of her passions and her moods and her ideas. And then, you know, there's loads of brilliant biographies and writings about her in different ways, and I read a lot of them. I read a brilliant biography called Romantic Outlaws that was laying the lives of her against the life of her daughter Mary Shelley, and, you know, really made them seem like thrilling and exciting figures. And then after that I would go back to her writing, and it was interesting how much more accessible I found it. So basically loads and loads and loads of reading, and reading things again and again and again and again until you felt like the core of them for you was really, really clear.
What was the central question of the play?
The central question of the play, that's always hard, but actually for this one it was kind of the starting point. I don't think we necessarily answer it, and I think that's okay. I don't think theatre has to, but so big question of the play was a question that is in the writings of Mary Wollstonecraft. Actually, after she has her first daughter, she has this brilliant quote that's there in the play that, you know, really drove me. And I'm not going to quote it verbatim, but basically she writes a letter, and in the letter she says, God, you know, wow, I've had this girl, and how should I bring her up? Because when you have a girl, you have to think about the fact that the world is hard and it might not treat her always fairly. And Mary says, I want to bring her up to be this amazing person, you know, to know her values and her power and her heart, and to think she can achieve all these things. But also, I know how the world is going to treat her. And being a woman that is fully realised in that way can be really rough. And Mary knows that because it's rough for her. So should I bring her up to be more muted? Should I bring her up to go along with things that she thinks are not right? Because actually maybe she'll be loved more if she does that. And I think that is a central question. How do you grow a girl in a world that doesn't always want them to succeed? Felt so current for me. And like, I'm at the age where, you know, all my friends are having kids, you're thinking about kids, and you're asking that question of, you know, of your how do you raise resilient, strong, brilliant children, but also knowing that you can't always protect them. And I think that is the question that Mary's life story seems so bound around for me. So that's what we're asking by telling it.
How do you represent Mary Shelley on stage?
Yeah, so structurally it really came out of the fact that theatre, this idea earlier that I was saying, that I think theatre has to feel alive. I don't think biography, just this happened and then this happened and this happened to someone, is a good enough reason for making a play. I think actually biographies are good when they're written down. So it has to feel current in terms of what it's trying to say, even if the events that it deals with are historical. And as I just said, like the question of the play felt so bound up in this idea of like how do you raise girls in this world, that, you know, not to have Mary Shelley felt like a stupid decision. Because, well, number one, like, being totally honest, Mary Shelley's got more people know about her than Wollstonecraft, which is, you know, kind of mad. But, you know, two, like, how amazing that these two incredible, brilliant, like, pioneering women are from the same family. And not to like highlight that also felt mad. But three, if our thread is about like what do women of the past have to say to women today, and how are we in conversation with them, to put two generations up there and make the framework of the play Mary Wollstonecraft actually getting to have a conversation with her daughter in a way that never tragically could have happened in real life. It felt like a gift that we could give to them, but also like a gift that we could give to us by saying, okay, so we get that Mary is, by speaking to Mary Shelley, is actually speaking to all of us, is actually saying these are the things, I've had to go through all these things, and these are the things that I wish you could know, and I want to equip you for the future. And that to me felt like really emotional and powerful.
What's the significance of music and song in the play?
It's a play with songs. Is it a musical? Like, oh, who knows? I think it probably is a play with songs rather than a musical, but, you know, those boundaries are blurred. And sometimes I think, does anybody outside of theatre actually care about them? Like, it doesn't matter. But, yeah, so the role of music, why did we decide to have songs? It always had songs in the pitch. I quite often, as a wildly unmusical person, which is strange, but make plays that involve a lot of music and song. Theatrically, that's because, like, being totally honest, songs give you permission to do things that can sometimes feel a bit clunky. Otherwise, you can like go across vast spaces, you can squeeze in some exposition, you can like travel really big distances. It heightens. Theatre is already heightened, right, outside of reality, and it gives you permission to really heighten things again. So as a form, it's quite exciting. And when you're telling a story of this kind of scope and vastness, I think it's a really helpful form to have embraced. The other thing was, we always knew in the pitch, I always said in the pitch, I want this to be a story that's like rooted in her time, but that allows us at points when we need them to have a really current and contemporary conversation with the audience. And what we found was actually the songs were a way to do that. So that like the songs use a language and like speak to issues that we are like really understanding today, and a language that they perhaps wouldn't have had at that time, even though those issues are present within the story. The other thing was that, you know, like songs can be really fun. And like we said, like this could be a really downbeat story. And don't get me wrong, we lean into that sometimes. I think it's good to feel things. I think like just being like girl power and pretending all the bad stuff doesn't exist is pointless. But like the songs, I think, really help to sometimes give us a break or elevate us from when we're like really rooted in the muck of what's happening. Yeah.
Who are the Hyenas?
Yeah, so the Hyenas are our kind of ensemble chorus who help to tell the story and sort of in charge of the music in the play. They all multi-role throughout, and that's because the play, I think, really embraces a kind of heightened theatricality. It's quite self-aware. So whilst Mary in the play is really experiencing everything as it happens, and she's on the real emotional journey of the play, the Hyenas are quite aware that they're telling a story and they're playing different characters, and they might have a nod and a wink to the audience and a kind of chat to us. And that's because, you know, we wanted that almost kind of music hall style and permission to be playful with the story that we're telling. And I think that's actually extra important because it's a historical story, because this isn't meant to be a history lesson. It's meant to be like, hey, this is what we're taking from this story. There might be a version of Mary that someone would tell that would be very, very different. And I think acknowledging your craft in that kind of style is really important. Who the Hyenas come from, they're called the Hyenas because it comes from a quote. Mary Wollstonecraft, was criticised a lot in her lifetime, and one of the things someone wrote about her was that she was a hyena in petticoats, and I got a bit obsessed with that because I thought, well, that actually sounds so cool. And sometimes you realise you wish women of history could be here in the present to like realise that the things thrown at them we embrace and we think, wow, I would love to be a hyena in petticoats. So her hyenas, they kind of flip throughout the play, but really they're women who are inspired by her ideas and who take it on, and sometimes they're in her head and sometimes they're outside it, and they play all these different characters.
How will the rehearsal process influence the development of the script?
It really varies writer to writer, to be totally honest, how much you like to be in rehearsals, how much your process involves that. But with a new play, definitely when it's like its premiere, I'd say it nearly always involves it a bit. For me, it tends to involve it quite a lot. Like, I love being in rehearsals. Sometimes you have to disappear, like sent away because, you know, you're hanging around like a bad smell. But yeah, and the reason for that is because I find it so helpful, even just to hear it aloud sounds so obvious, but like a play is kind of a living, breathing thing. So until you're in rehearsals, until you've got actors, there's loads of stuff that, you know, you kind of, we probably will be on about draft 7 or 8 of the play before we enter rehearsals, and then so much stuff suddenly in the first week becomes like really apparent, and you think, how have I been doing this for 9 years and I've not noticed? But it's just about being really responsive to that. I find cutting, like, often you can just suddenly see whole chunks you don't need because an actor is doing something really brilliant and you're like, oh yeah, I've overwritten that. Structurally, hopefully we're pretty sound, but again, simplification often comes from seeing stuff on stage. And then actually, because it's a play with songs, in my experience, more stuff does change, and that's because you're dealing with so many more moving elements, and actually also because this has a really high level of multi-rolling, so there probably will be, in all honesty, some really practical stuff where you're like, oh God, I've written that she goes off there, but then she's got to come straight back on there, but she's got to have a wig and a whole costume change, so I need to like change the order of that. Or like, hey, actually with this song, it feels like that bit of text, when we're actually doing it live, needs to go in the middle or needs to rhythmically even out. So it putting a play together, a new play, for me always feels like kind of you're as the writer, you know, you're in the middle of the orchestra, and you can't feel that until rehearsal. So yeah, it's a really exciting time, but I think it will kind of change a bit, maybe more than some of the actors would like, is often the case. But yeah.